Howdy everyone. Today I'm looking at what should be the best of the best, Canon's current professional workhorse lens, the 24-70mm f2.8 USM L Mark II. This is the long-awaited update to the original 24-70L lens, which I reviewed about 4 months ago. Canon claimed to have improved the picture quality, and they've also made the lens smaller and lighter, as well as jacking up the price. Typical Canon. This lens costs over £1,500, which is an astonishing amount of money. Clearly, it's aimed at the professional market, especially for press and wedding photographers. This thing had better be really, really good. It goes without saying that this lens is designed especially for Canon's expensive full-frame cameras, but I'll also test it out on an APS-C camera for you. The lens starts at a very wide angle of 24mm, well, wide angle on a full-frame camera, and zooms in to 70mm. It's worth bearing in mind that 70mm isn't really all that far to zoom into on a full-frame camera, but it's still a very useful focal range for any camera lens. And the lens has a wide f2.8 maximum aperture throughout its zoom range. That means it can let in a lot of light, which is great for indoor or nighttime photography, getting faster shutter speeds, or for video work. Also, shooting at f2.8 can give you lovely out-of-focus backgrounds, which slower camera lenses cannot do. Well, let's look at this lens's build quality. The lens is big and very solid indeed, and it's weighty but not too heavy. It's certainly much lighter than the original 24-70. There's a lot of plastic in this lens's construction, although obviously it's good quality plastic. This thing is weather sealed and generally tough. It could probably survive in a war zone. The zoom ring on my test copy of the lens was actually quite stiff, but I'm assured that normally they are super smooth. The front element of the lens extends as you zoom in. The focus ring is large and works smoothly. As usual for a lens at this price point, it has full-time manual focusing, so you can turn that focus ring anytime. The front element of the lens does not extend or rotate as you change focus. The lens's USM autofocus motor is lightning fast and very accurate. However, it does make a quietish, low whooshing noise, so it's not completely silent. A surprising thing for most people is that there is no image stabilization on this lens. It was a very bold decision by Canon not to implement image stabilization, and a lot of photographers were extremely disappointed that a lens even more expensive than its predecessor wouldn't be upgraded in this way, as it's a very popular and useful feature. The lack of image stabilization is a shame, as it's useful for still photographers and those wanting to do handheld video work. Well, anyway, apart from that omission, the lens is built to a very high standard indeed. Okay, let's look at image quality. I'll start by testing this lens on a full-frame camera, a 20-megapixel Canon 6D, with chromatic aberration and vignetting correction turned on. At 24mm with the aperture wide open at f2.8, image quality is stunning in the middle of the picture. Super sharp with a lot more contrast than Canon's original 24-70mm L lens. Let's look in the corners. They're not quite as perfect as in the middle of the image, but they're pretty close. We see great sharpness levels, even to the extreme corners. There's also no visible chromatic aberration. What an amazing performance. Stop the lens down to f4 and those corners become completely razor sharp. So that's a pretty wonderful performance at 24mm. Let's zoom in to 35mm. At f2.8, once again, we see absolute perfection in the middle of the image. The corners are noticeably softer, but not bad at all. Stop down to f4 or f5.6 for some improvement, although the corners are never quite razor sharp. Let's zoom all the way into 70mm. It's the same story. At f2.8, the lens is perfect in the middle of the image. The corners are a little softer, but not bad. There's a mild improvement when you stop down to f4 and stop down to f5.6 for the best sharpness in those corners. Well, what can we say overall? The 24-70mm f2.8 L Mark II always gives razor-sharp images in the middle of the image frame with fantastic colours and contrast levels. As you zoom the lens in, the corners of your images lose their grip on perfection, but they're never bad. I hoped for slightly sharper corners from this lens, but still, it's the best performance of any full-frame fast standard zoom lens. Okay, let's test the lens on an APS-C camera, in this case a 20 megapixel Canon 70D. Again, chromatic aberration and vignetting correction are turned on. At 24mm with the aperture wide open at f2.8, we see fantastic sharpness in the middle of the image, which continues as we look into the corners. There is no visible chromatic aberration. Stop the lens down to f4 for even more sharpness and contrast. What a great performance! Let's zoom in a bit to 35mm. Again, at f2.8, the lens is crazy sharp in the middle of the image. The corners are a tiny bit soft, even when you stop down to f4. Let's finally zoom all the way into 70mm. At f2.8, the middle of the image is very sharp indeed, although you can get a little punchier contrast. The corners of the image are, again, a bit softer. Stop the lens down to f4 for a mild improvement in the corners, and noticeably more sharpness and contrast in the middle of the image. So overall, the lens puts in a solid enough performance on an APS-C camera, but I was hoping for a bit more sharpness in those corners. Moving on, let's look at vignetting and distortion. They're not really a problem on an APS-C camera, so let's look at the full frame results. We do see barrel distortion at 24mm, it's noticeable, but a little less than average for a zoom lens. The extreme edges of the image are a little dark. You can use peripheral illumination correction on your camera to brighten them up, or just stop the lens down to f4 or f5.6 and the corners become nice and bright. Zoom in to about 35mm and the distortion largely straightens out, and even at f2.8 we see much less vignetting. Zoom in to 70mm and we see some noticeable pincushion distortion, but it's nothing too serious. Again, vignetting is confined to the extreme corners, and stopping down to f4 gets rid of it. So overall, it's quite a good performance for vignetting and a little better than average for distortion. The lens can focus averagely closely to your subject. The close-up image quality is quite sharp at f2.8, becoming fantastic at f4. It's good enough for pictures of flowers and other small things. The lens works averagely well against bright light. You lose a little contrast and you get some quite bitty flaring. I was hoping for a little better from Canon's best professional lens. Some really good news though is that the lens has very nice quality bokeh. The wide aperture can give you quite an out of focus background, and those out of focus areas look lovely and smooth and non-distracting. That's a very good performance for a zoom lens. So what can we say overall? The lens gives you very snappy, punchy pictures that really jump out at you with fantastic sharpness in the middle of your images and good corners. The quality of the bokeh is particularly nice on this lens. You can get brilliant pictures. Generally, the lens is certainly a lot better than the original 24-70mm f2.8 L lens. The optical quality is a little bit average in some areas though, and I admit that I was hoping for a bit more magic from this instrument, especially considering how very expensive it is. But at the end of the day, it's truly a fantastic camera lens, even if it's wildly overpriced. Canon's choice to charge so much money for their lenses is really pricing a lot of people out of their market, a decision which Sigma and Tamron are now taking advantage of by making higher quality lenses themselves. But that's Canon's business, and value for money is always subjective. Professionals will probably still pay for this lens anyway, because if you need the very best zoom lens available, then this is it.